Why does he still go on about that?
He always did. He was always, I suppose, jealous of my verse speaking being admired, because he thought he spoke it just as well as I did, and in a way he did. But
at 95 years old, Sir John Gielgud had reached a point in life where reputation no longer needed protection. His name was already written into history. He was seen as one of the greatest classical actors Britain had ever produced, a master of Shakespeare, and a symbol of elegance, control, and tradition. For most of his life, the public saw only his calm voice, his perfect posture, and his polite manners. What they did not see were the emotional struggles that lived beneath the surface. British theatre during the 20th century was not a gentle world. It was full of ambition, rivalry, and constant comparison. Actors were judged harshly, replaced quickly, and often pushed into competition with people they respected and secretly feared. John Gielgud survived in this world for almost 80 years, but survival came at a cost. Behind the applause and standing ovations were moments of pain, frustration, and quiet anger that stayed with him for decades. Gielgud was not a man who shouted or created public drama. He did not fight loudly or complain in interviews. Instead, he remembered. He remembered every insult, every unfair comparison, every moment when someone else received praise he believed he had earned. As he grew older, he began to speak more openly about these experiences. He admitted that rivalry was part of the craft, and that no one could reach the top of British theatre without making enemies along the way. Some conflicts were small and faded with time. Others stayed sharp and personal, shaping how he viewed the people around him. These feelings were not always about hatred in the loud sense. They were about deep disappointment, wounded pride, and the pain of feeling misunderstood in a world that was constantly changing. As theater moved forward, styles changed. New actors arrived with different energy, different beliefs, and different methods. Gielgud, who valued structure, discipline, and the musical quality of language, often felt pushed aside by performers who relied on physical power or emotional force instead of careful speech. To him, this shift felt like a rejection of everything he had dedicated his life to protecting. Over time, certain names became tied to these feelings, not because of one single argument or insult, but because of years of tension, comparison, and emotional distance. Late in life, when asked if he regretted holding on to these memories, Gielgud answered honestly. He said that theater was never just about art. It was about ego, power, and survival. And in such a world, resentment was almost impossible to avoid. These are the 6 people who affected John Gielgud the most, the figures who challenged him, frustrated him, and left marks on his emotional life that never fully disappeared. The most famous and longest rivalry in John Gielgud's life was with Laurence Olivier. Their competition shaped British theatre for nearly half a century. At first, there was respect. Both men recognized each other's talent. But respect slowly turned into tension as their careers grew side by side. Gielgud believed that Shakespeare should be spoken with care, rhythm, and musical precision. He treated the text like sacred music, where every word mattered. Olivier believed in movement, strength, and emotional power. He brought Shakespeare closer to modern audiences by making performances more physical and dramatic. Critics loved comparing them, often framing the discussion as a battle between old tradition and new energy. This constant comparison placed heavy pressure on both men. As Olivier began to succeed in films and gained international fame, Gielgud felt increasingly overlooked by cinema. He believed that Olivier's success changed how people judged Shakespearean acting, favoring spectacle over subtlety. Their disagreements became more personal when Olivier gained leadership roles within major theater institutions. Gielgud often felt sidelined, invited when convenient, and ignored when power shifted. Though they sometimes worked together, the emotional distance between them never truly closed. To Gielgud, Olivier became a symbol of a changing world that no longer valued the art form he loved most. Another important figure in Gielgud's life was Ralph Richardson. Unlike Olivier, Richardson was not a clear enemy. Their relationship was complicated, filled with both admiration and irritation. Richardson was spontaneous and unpredictable. He followed instinct rather than structure, often changing his performance without warning. Gielgud respected his talent, but struggled with his lack of discipline. During rehearsals, this difference caused tension. Gielgud believed Shakespeare required careful control, while Richardson believed freedom created truth. Critics often praised Richardson's boldness and forgave his mistakes, while Gielgud felt his own discipline was sometimes criticized as stiffness. This imbalance hurt deeply. Gielgud also struggled with Richardson's humor. Jokes that were meant to be friendly often felt disrespectful to him. Small comments stayed in his mind for years. Though the two actors maintained polite public appearances, the emotional distance never fully healed. Richardson represented to Gielgud the unfairness of a system that rewarded risk while questioning restraint. As time passed, these rivalries shaped how Gielgud viewed his place in theater. He felt constantly measured, constantly compared, and rarely allowed to simply exist as himself. These experiences created a quiet bitterness that followed him into later life, influencing how he remembered the people who stood beside him on stage. Beyond Olivier and Richardson, there were other figures who left lasting emotional marks on John Gielgud's life. One such person was Peter O'Toole. O'Toole represented a new generation of actors who brought raw energy and emotional intensity to the stage. Audiences loved him. Directors praised him. Gielgud, however, found his style overwhelming and careless. He believed that O'Toole relied too much on passion and not enough on discipline. Watching younger actors receive praise for methods he did not respect made Gielgud feel increasingly out of place. There were also directors who pushed him into roles or interpretations he disagreed with. These conflicts were not always public, but they added to his sense of losing control over his craft. As theater institutions changed leadership and values, Gielgud often felt that his voice mattered less than it once had. He believed that experience was being replaced by novelty. This shift created resentment toward people who benefited from the new system. In his later years, Gielgud became more reflective. He did not deny his resentment, but he also did not frame himself as a victim. He understood that competition was part of artistic life. He admitted that pride played a role in his feelings. At the same time, he believed that the emotional cost of a long career was rarely discussed honestly. Behind every celebrated performance were private struggles that never reached the audience. Gielgud's story reminds us that greatness often comes with emotional sacrifice. Admiration does not erase pain. Applause does not heal insecurity. Even the most respected figures carry wounds that shape how they remember their lives. When John Gielgud spoke about the people who hurt or challenged him, he was not trying to settle scores. He was telling the truth about a world where talent alone was never enough. His honesty offers a rare look behind the curtain of classical theater, showing that elegance on stage often hides turmoil behind the scenes. In the end, Gielgud's legacy remains untouchable. He is remembered for his voice, his intelligence, and his devotion to language. But his reflections also remind us that even legends are human. They feel jealousy, they feel disappointment, and they remember the people who made their journey harder. That truth, shared at the end of a long life, may be his most powerful performance of all. Sir John Gielgud, one of the most celebrated actors of the 20th century, lived a life that many could only dream of. Born in London in 1904, he became a legend not only for his performances on stage and screen, but also for his dedication to the craft of acting, which he pursued with unmatched discipline, passion, and precision. By the time he reached the age of 95, he had performed in countless productions, earned numerous awards, and shared the stage with some of the most talented actors of his era. His voice, his presence, and his understanding of Shakespearean drama made him an icon, someone whom audiences and fellow actors alike revered. But even a life filled with accolades, fame, and respect had its shadows. Despite his remarkable career and seemingly calm demeanor, Gielgud admitted that there were people in his life whom he resented deeply, people whose behavior, arrogance, or disregard for tradition left him frustrated, angry, or even hurt. Over the decades, Gielgud witnessed not only the evolution of theater and cinema, but also the rise of a younger generation of actors, directors, and critics who challenged his ideals, questioned his methods, and sometimes even ridiculed the very principles he had spent a lifetime defending. In interviews and private reflections later in life, he candidly revealed 6 individuals who, for one reason or another, left a lasting mark on him, not because of personal attacks alone, but because they represented a clash of values, ideas, and visions for the future of theater. It is important to understand that Gielgud's sense of resentment was rarely petty or personal in a trivial way. It stemmed from deep-seated beliefs about what acting should be, how theater should function, and the respect that should be accorded to the craft. These 6 individuals were not mere adversaries or rivals in the ordinary sense. They were figures whose actions, whether intentional or unintentional, symbolized a shift in the artistic world, a world that Gielgud loved, revered, and in some ways feared might be changing too rapidly. As we explore the stories behind these 6 people, it becomes clear that his feelings were not simple dislike. They were complex mixtures of professional disappointment, ideological differences, personal frustration, and the inevitable tensions that arise when tradition meets innovation. His reflections on these figures reveal not only his personal struggles, but also the broader challenges that every artist faces when navigating changing times, evolving tastes, and the ambitions of others. To Gielgud, theater was more than entertainment. It was a disciplined art form, a sacred space where language, emotion, and precision came together to create something timeless. And when others seemed to disregard or undermine that vision, it left him feeling threatened, misunderstood, and, in the strongest cases, deeply resentful. These 6 people, whose names he revealed